He's good? Oh, hello. Craig Marshall needs no introduction, as we know him as one of ours. He might be the only monk you know. He's truly mindful. He was a Boy Scout. Great pictures online of Craig as a baby and a Boy Scout, and a fellow Trojan, and is an expert photographer and a personal life coach. So without further ado, here's Craig.
That's the most accurate introduction ever. I got the travel bug when I was 17 years old and went with my Methodist church youth group to Germany, and we all lived with a German family each, and we rebuilt a church that had been bombed out in World War II. So that was a very eye-opening experience on many levels. And so I was a sort of Europhile. I really got hypnotized with Europe and have been there many, many times, as have many of you. But the first time I went to Egypt, I was about 20-something, and it completely blew out all the circuitry in my brain because it didn't fit into any context I had about life or history or anything. And I think that the only thing I want to say in introduction is last time when Walter Cruttenden was speaking, he was speaking about this giant 24,000-year cycle that most ancient cultures believe in. They don't believe in linear history coming from zero. They believe in past, higher, and lower ages. And I took a lot of notes from his talk, but I had forgotten something that he said that I think is really, really pivotal for me. And he was talking about the Greeks, the ancient Greeks, that also believed in that same cyclical history model of calendar. And he said that the lowest age that purportedly we're just now coming out of was called by the Greeks the lead age, and it was the age of men. And the next age, the Bronze Age, is the age of the hero, and the next age, the Silver Age, is the age of the demigods, and the highest golden age is the age of the gods. So to me, it's like that's an extraordinary description of how mankind's sense of self changes through this period. You know, where in the lower ages, we think God is distant, separate, all these things. And that's starting to change now, even in our lifetimes, isn't it? We're starting to integrate it more and really understand our potential and manifest that potential more and more. So it's kind of exciting. But I think that's the main takeaway for me with going to Egypt, because it gives you a real graphic picture of another age and another sense of self. So this was taken a long time ago, and I've been there 5 times, and this is not a scholarly trip we're going on, but this was a Halloween get-up I had when I was a monk, and everybody told me, they said, that's the real you, which is true, you know. And so when you go to Egypt, it's set up for tourism. It's just perfect because of the Nile cruise. There's so many temples and exciting things right along the river, but you start in Cairo, and Cairo's worth spending at least 3 days, 1 day at the pyramids, and 1 day doing the museum, and 1 day doing the big, beautiful mosque and the bazaar. And then otherwise, Cairo's just a sprawling, busy, you know, metropolis. But this is called the Mena House, this hotel. It's an old war horse. You can stay in the Montgomery Suite or the Eisenhower Suite. It goes way back. Everybody who was anybody stayed there. And as you can see, it's in walking distance of the pyramids. And it's been expanded now, and it's owned by Marriott, and the amenities are beautiful. It's very comfortable. And yet you can get up at the morning and walk. The pyramids now, the enclosure is walled off, so you have to pay whatever to get inside. But it gives you the idea of the proximity, and every night there's sound and light shows going on, so it's a very vivid experience to stay there. And Karina didn't want her picture shown, so these are just some people in the hotel that happen to be there. But the Giza complex is wall-to-wall graves. So if they excavated any square foot, they would find history there. And Egypt is a rather poor country. It's a very westernized country because it's always been a crossroads city, Cairo, like Istanbul and Rome, so it's very cosmopolitan. They speak many languages. The Egyptian people are very friendly, but the history is what intrigues me. And so they don't have the money to excavate all of this, because then they'd have to have guards and have, tourism would sort of overwhelm it. So even as it is, there is a lot of tourists there year round. But if you're going to go, the winter, spring, fall months are definitely the time to go, because in Upper Egypt, it can reach 120. It gets almost as hot as Palm Springs. So these are the two of the three major pyramids. The one over there is the youngest one, Khefren, and this is the Great Pyramid here on the left. And you can see some people on horses over there on the right to give you a scale. But this is the only original facing that you can see on the top. Originally, they were completely faced with white stone. And on the top, they had something called a pyramidon, which was an alloy of gold and silver. So you could see it reflecting across the desert for probably 40 or 50 miles. So in the old days, it must have been super impressive, but it still is, just because of the sheer size of it. And what's interesting about Egypt is they really know nothing about it. You can go with every guidebook under the sun, and it'll go blah, 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 and give you the name of the pharaohs and some dates and some things like that. And they have translated the hieroglyphs literally, but they don't know the esoteric meaning. So it really is blah, blah, blah. Egypt is nothing but layers upon layers of mystery. They don't know why the pyramids were built. They don't know that they were tombs. It's all guesswork, so it's very open. And yet the tourists love them. They come from all over the world every single day. And this is the entrance, and it just shows you the engineering, that underneath many of these stones, when they blew them up, they found that kind of architecture, which is all throughout the pyramid, and it just shows you how thought out it was, that it could bear that amount of weight. There's 2.5 million stones. They fit together like, you can't put a credit card between them, and they don't know how they move them around. They have no clue. So you can go inside, and there's many chambers. One is underneath the pyramid. There's another one called the Queen's Chamber, and then this leads to the King's Chamber. So if you're claustrophobic, take a deep breath before you go in. And it's not that far in a tunnel like this, and then you get into this corbel vaulted, beautiful stairway. And it's about 40 feet tall and beveled edges, and it's just immaculate, And so you just are kind of in awe on many levels, both psychically, whatever the heck it all is about, and even engineering-wise. And then you have to bend down and crawl and go through, 20 or 30 yards of this, and you get into the King's Chamber, and you can see how the stones fit together. There's no mortar, no cement. It's just stone against stone, and how they did it. And so we were with a tour on this, so this is a good glimpse of what you would go through if you just went on a package tour of Egypt. But our tour, after it closed at 7 o'clock at night, we got to go in there by ourselves and meditate in total darkness for about an hour and 45 minutes. And the acoustics in here are unbelievable. So people were chanting Om, and it was just like, wow, where am I? Another world. But it's like, who were these people? Where did they come from? Where did they get their values? And one of the factoids of ancient Egypt is that at a certain point, they had a proto-language, just chicken scratchings and very primitive. And then all of a sudden, the hieroglyphs came onto the scene, kind of full-blown, as I understand it. I'm not a scholar, but I think it was an imported culture. Maybe Atlantis or some more evolved culture came in and brought, a whole knowledge. Bill?
Do you have the dates for when this imported culture came in?
No, that's a really good question, because even if you come to the CPAC conference that Walter sponsors every year, there's a speaker who will be speaking this year. His name is Dr. Robert Schoch, and he's written many books about the Sphinx and the pyramids, and he says that there's water damage on the Sphinx, and it hasn't rained in thousands of years here on the Giza Plateau. So he purports that it's even a previous cycle. So they think now it's like 3,500 years old, but it could be 24,000 plus that many. They really don't know, because you can't carbon date stone. But there's a lot left of ancient Egypt. And interestingly enough, they had no civic architecture of any import. So you can't, like in Rome, you go see the grandeur of the Forum and all these civic buildings and, it's overpowering. In Egypt, zero. None of that, because they didn't put any energy into that. It was all spiritual. So basically what you're seeing is two things, temples and tombs. Isn't that interesting? Because they were a spiritually based culture that we can't even imagine. And so the number of pleats on their skirts, the colors of the stones, of the jewelry, everything represented the gods, which I think they understood as various energies. So it was very graphic. And like even in the military, their units would march into battle in the shape of the god that was their protector. I mean, down to the nth detail, it was totally spiritual. Everybody's name, their dress, everything. There were no architectural styles. There was no like Renaissance or medieval art or, none of that. It was the same because it was driven by energies or astrology or something that was fixed, and they were in tune with it. But you can see even from the glass eyes here, and these are common people here. So it was a very egalitarian culture. Women had to be empowered. You see pictures of them everywhere. And even though there was a class going on at different times, there was an elegance to it all. And this is the statue in the main museum of this pharaoh Khephren. The Greeks called him Khafre, the ancient Egyptians called him. And he was the pharaoh of that pyramid with the facing on the top. And look at this statue. It's very elegant, but look at behind him. Built into his Nemes headdress is Horus, his god protector. Isn't that a gorgeous integration? And not only to, think about something like this, but to execute it in this very high art form is like, you just look at it and you watch people around you in the museum and they're just standing there with their mouths open. They've never seen anything quite like it. Where Greek sculpture, Roman sculpture, was very human, right? It's lifelike. Where this is more otherworldly integrated with the human. So there's two sides to it. So we got to sit around and meditate because we were staying in the hotel, and then Karina got tricked. And here's how they get you. They say, hey, you want your picture taken with a camel? $1, So you say, yeah, I want my picture taken with a camel. Don't do it. Because you go over there, they take your picture, and the next thing is, well, why don't you get on the camel? It'd be much better picture, I'll take a lot. I know your camera. They know every camera better than you do, Pretty soon you get on the camel, and you know what? They have him stand up. Then you're dead. Because you're like 9 feet in the air, right? And it's stone underneath you, and then they start walking, and you're on a camel ride. That's what happens. But it's fun. But we went with our group way out into the desert and had a lot of fun. The camels are very, very fun. But you can see the proximity to the city. And wherever you go, they're digging. There's excavations going on. And this is one of the scenic photo spots. And then there's this enclosure built by the Italians because only in the 50s they stumbled onto something new, which they always are. And that was this sacred boat. Do you remember when you were a kid reading about that in the National Geographic? It was a big deal. Well, this boat was found in a stone tomb with gigantic stones, and it was in pieces. There was something like 1,200 pieces. And this boat has no nails or screws. It was all held together with ropes, and when you would put it in the water, the wood would swell, and it became watertight. It's huge. It's absolutely huge. I don't know how long it is. But this is a ceremonial boat, but it just shows what they were able to do engineering-wise. That's what it looks like. This guy dedicated his whole life to putting these pieces together. And nearby there is, of course, the Sphinx, which is set deeper in the bedrock. And it's an interesting thing because they still are working on it, preserving it. There are rooms underneath it. They have explored a little part of it. The nose was shot off by Napoleon soldiers back in the 1800s. But everybody that goes to Egypt gets sucked in sooner or later. Even Napoleon, he went completely Egyptian. And he spent the night in the king's chamber of the Cheops pyramid, and he never would talk about it. He came out white as a ghost, and people said, what happened? He never would say. but he was talking to the guy that he was with when he was in exile at the end of his life on St. Helena. He started to tell him about it, and finally he said nobody would believe it. So he never even spoke about his experience. But this stone here that Karina's with, you can see the beveled edges. And this thing probably weighs about 3 or 4 tons, you know? And yet it's from way up high. And it's like how they could even lift it, you know, is like beyond. And so this is an even older pyramid. This is purportedly the oldest stone building in the world, the Saqqara pyramid, the step pyramid. And there's many of these tombs with hieroglyphs like this, so they know a lot about daily life, because hundreds of thousands of these pictographs about hunting and fishing and how they stored their food and what they ate. This is called the Red Pyramid, and we walked completely around that, and that gives you an idea of the layers and the facing and how the stones went together. And you can go in the pyramid up there, so you walk up there, and then you go way down underneath the pyramid. Again, it just seems like a long, 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 long way, and then you crawl through another tunnel like this, and then you get in another room like this. It's just unbelievable, the engineering, and it's like going to another planet, actually. And this is the remains of another pyramid that is decayed. And then near there is a place called the Serapeum, where they have this sarcophagi of about 100 of their sacred bulls, which was somehow symbolic. So they have these massive sarcophagi. Can you believe? That's the lid of the sarcophagus, you know? I mean, it must weigh 20 tons, you know, and the bottom of it is even bigger. So you walk around this place, this is the top and the bottom, and it's just like, how did they build these? How did they drag them around? What are they for? Nothing. People just don't know. It's all guesswork. This is the main museum downtown. It's very dusty and old-fashioned now because they're moving a lot of this. They're building near the pyramids the largest museum in the world. It's very snazzy on the outside. It's supposed to open in 2020, and it'll probably have interactive displays and be one of the wonders of the world. So that's the time to go to Egypt. So everything's stamped on there with the Grand Egyptian Museum because it's being boxed up and getting ready to be shipped over. But it's from, you know, this is probably from Roman times. So you can get very confused with Egyptian history because it stayed the same. You know, the Greeks didn't mess with it. They were the real genesis of their information. The Romans, all the Roman emperors went there. It was the breadbasket of Rome because they grow so much food, especially in the Delta. And yet there's this elegance. And they use these spiritual colors of gold and blue and white, you know, that are tradition. And this is the young Ramses. Ramses II was the pharaoh of Exodus, supposedly. He lived around 1250 BC, so that would have been Moses' time. And they know a lot about him because he put his cartouche on many things. His father was a very famous pharaoh named Seti I. And they know about his childhood, and this is the Luxor temple, and there's these giant statues. And see those columns there? They're like 90 feet tall, and originally there was a roof on it. And it's like, how did they even lift the stones? How did they get them to balance? They didn't have cranes. They didn't even have the wheel, supposedly. You know, so it's a mind bender. You know, it does not make sense. And yet these statues are so elegant. And they say, oh, they were carved by gangs of slaves and everything, but it couldn't have been because the symmetry of them all. If you had 50 people, you know, chiseling away at a face that big, there'd be irregularities where they met, you know. But it's like if you took a ruler and you measured it, the symmetry would just be perfect. The nose and the, you know, the features and everything. It's like a laser cut it. It's so smooth. And this is the cartouche of Ramses II, and this is in Karnak. There it is again. And this was a bracelet that was his. It was even old in his time. They know it was an antique. It was designed hundreds of years even before. And this is at Abu Simbel, which they cut apart. Remember when they flooded the Nile plain there, when the Russians built a high dam in 1956 or something, and it was going to be underwater, so they had to move it up 200 feet higher. And this temple was designed by Ramses to commemorate the 30th anniversary of his accession to the throne. And this is something like in 1230 BC. And it was designed so that the sunrise on that day would come through the door of the temple into the mountain and illuminate. And there's 4 divine characters on the altar. And one of them was Osiris. And Osiris is the god of the underworld. So he's always depicted with a green face. And so the sunrise on that day would come and illuminate 3 of the gods, leaving Osiris in darkness. They could do that in 1250 BC. But in 1967, when they moved it 200 yards up, and they had all their computers plot the, angles of it all, they not only missed, it now illumines 4 figures, not 3, and they missed the date by 2 days. So it's like, what's happening, And this is part of the interior. But the Ramses restaurant is still doing well, and this is his mummy in the Cairo Museum, which of course is probably the most famous body in the world. They took it to Paris, and they had a full state. You talk about Paris being so elegant and everything. They had the royal guards and everything, and with his mummy being transported for radiation to get rid of all the fungus. And when you go on a Nile cruise and you go upriver, you dock right here in Luxor, and the Luxor temple is like right where the boats are. So you can walk across the street to it. And this is a Sphinx alley between the Luxor temple and this Karnak complex, which you may have heard of, which is many, many temples in a huge, huge area. And in the last century, they discovered a pit there. And they started digging, and they found all these buried statues. And somehow the priest at one period of history cleaned house and put something like 8,000 statues in this pit, covered it up. And so when they excavated it all, most of the museums in the world, like in Paris and London and the Met in New York, all these famous Egyptian museums, 90% of the stuff comes out of that one pit. Isn't that interesting? And they don't even know what it means or where it came from or why. So this is the middle of the Karnak complex. This is this famous hypostyle hall. And not only did they have roofs and everything, they even had lattice work to let in light on the mezzanine, just to get a lighting effect. And yet we think these are primitive, people. And these are gigantic, incised reliefs of Osiris and Isis, and this is Ramses and his main queen, Nefertari. And these obelisks are everywhere with the little pyramid tips. And here, they have a sound and light show at Karnak, and you can walk through the whole complex. And there's music and dramatizations. It's really impressive. Bill, you had a question?
I was just gonna say, are these made from one stone, a single stone?
Yeah, it's unbelievable.
From a single stone?
Yeah, and how they can get these, I know when they put the one up in St. Peter's Square in Rome, which was in around 14 or 1500, it was brought from Egypt, and there's 12 Egyptian obelisks in Rome, in all the major hills and squares. And when they were putting that one up, they were so worried that we're going to break it. So they had sand underneath it, and they had ropes, and they were pulling it up, and the ropes were heating up on these pulleys. And the Pope had said that if anybody spoke, they would be excommunicated. So there was utter silence in St. Peter's Square, and there were hundreds of thousands of people there watching this very famous thing. And Julius Caesar's ashes were in a ball on the top of it at the time. And as they were pulling it up, the ropes started to slip and heat up. And this one guy, risking his own life from Genoa, yelled out, "Water on the ropes," because he was a sailor. And so they put water on the ropes, and that saved it, so they were able to get it up. And ever since that day to today, Genoa pays a certain tax not to the Roman government because he saved the danged obelisk. I mean, there's these little tidbits of history. It's just like nonstop. But these are just different pylons. You can still see the original colors and many of them underneath. And this gives you an idea of the scope. They're still excavating, and they will for another 1,000 years. They go very slowly, but I told Karina it was nice that the Beverly Hills Polo Club was represented at Karnak on that day. But it's vast. And guided tours, you know, I've been on so many of them, so I'm running around taking my pictures. I wasn't interested in all the little tidbits of information because I heard it. But they're still collecting things so they know basically what it looked like and where it belongs. So they stack the stones up, and when they get a certain amount of them, then they reconstruct it. But there's still these little temples everywhere, hundreds of them. And then, of course, papyrus is a communication tool for the longest time. And so they give you demonstrations, and you can buy these papyrus, which are very reasonably priced. And we bought one as a wedding gift, so we had the two names of the bride and groom put on there in hieroglyphs. It was kind of a fun gift. And then carpet making. You know, everybody is into Persian carpets, and understanding how they're made is quite a journey. I have a little movie here, if it'll play. It's kind of fun.
And that's how the design, you know, here, comes here, and we can check on the garment to see if there's any mistakes or not. It will be a very expensive mistake. You have to untie all the knots and restart again. I mean for the part you did. But usually a professional, people, an expert.
So you can imagine how many knots are in a rug like that. It takes a year to make a 6x9 rug.
Let's see, say if we have a 6x9 feet rug, it would
So he's tying different colored yarns and little knots according to a map.
for 640,000.
So this is all blue thread, so he's putting the blue where it belongs.
Double that by 6.
Is this real time or is this
Yeah.
sped up?
No. Yeah, they move. And then here's the final product, you know? And one is more gorgeous than another. And then we went to a mosque, and these mosques are so beautiful. They're all indoors, outdoor. There's such an elegance to it all. It's a shame that, you know, fundamentalists and terrorists, you know, are associated with the Muslim because the religion itself is so gorgeous. Karina and the women had to wear this green Ku Klux Klan outfit. But it's just the lighting effects, the peace of these places is palpable. And then this is in central Egypt, and there's two main temples there worth seeing. This is the exterior, this is Sacred Pond, and this gives you a little scale of how big the pillars are, and then you go inside, and this temple's called Dendera. How many of you have been there? Yeah. It's unique because of these Hathor-headed columns, and it's very famous because of an astrological calendar on the ceiling that's from here, and it really is awe-inspiring. You can't really capture it in pictures, but you do get a glimpse of it all, and it's wall-to-wall hieroglyphs. And this is not an ancient temple. This is from the time of Christ. So biblical history is yesteryear in Egypt. It's not old at all. And so people, Egyptians during Roman times, would have built this, but yet they use the same motifs, the same symbology as was traditionally used. And I'll show you one more video here that gives you a little scale. And there's birds in this temple. It's very charming. This gives you a little sense of the size of the columns. People go into these temples usually on tours, so they're in a group with a guide, and then you start just wandering around because it's so sort of haunting that you end up getting lost, or people are delayed, or you know, it's always a journey to get everybody back together again because they're so. Look at that, you know, it's like you don't know what to make of it, but you know it has meaning. It's all symbolic. It's probably on many different layers, but there's a presence, an elegance, a refinement. You know, I don't have the words to describe any of this. This is just the carving on a little light point. And you can sit in these temples and they have little holes in the roof with these pencil beams of light coming in. So you can watch that beam of light traverse these various hieroglyphs across the wall, because they're wall-to-wall hieroglyphs, you know. So it's like a silent liturgy or something, you know, it's like a silent chant going on. And this is a temple of the father of Ramses II, Seti I, and I've been there several times, and this is my favorite place in Egypt because of the interiors. And this is the pharaoh on the right with one of the gods, and it shows the intimacy between them. And this is a hieroglyph they think is, you know, in modern times they say it's a helicopter or something, but who knows? You can project just about anything you want onto all of this. But look at these reliefs. These are raised reliefs, so it takes 10 times longer than an incised relief because they have to cut away the other part of the stone. The colors are original. And it's just so vivid. And this is a representation of some kind of spinal energy, you know. It's called the Wadjet staff. And again, they know very little about it, so your guess is as good as anybody's. And behind it is something called the Osirian, which has, again, these gigantic stones like in the Giza Plateau, and you have to go through a tunnel to get under there. But here they have these writings which are part of sacred geometry, which you might have heard of. And it's like they don't even know how this is, it's not carved, it's like burned onto the stone. They don't even know anything about it. They don't know a date, they don't know anything about it. And so we meditated there when the sun was going down. It was a very peaceful place. And of course, this is Hatshepsut's temple. She was one of the only female pharaohs. It's a really beautiful location on the West Bank with, again, these Hathor-headed columns. And these are very old. This was probably the largest temple in the world. The pharaoh's name was Amenhotep III. He was older. And these, when the wind blows, it makes a sound through the cracks. It's very famous, goes back. And these are little carriages to take you up the Valley of the Kings. This is where the pharaohs are buried. There's tombs everywhere. Royals are there. This is the latest discovered tomb, and this is called KV5. And it was built by Ramses II, and he's the only pharaoh in all of Egyptian history that built a tomb for his children, the only one. So there's like 60 kids buried in there. So this is just some scenes from various tombs that are very deep in the ground, and you can see the colors, how they're preserved, and the size of the sarcophagus, you know, the weight of it all, you know, unthinkable. And this is Seti I. This is Ramses' father. This is the most famous tomb there. It's also one of the bigger ones. Impressive, the colors and the detail and the richness of it all. And this is where the sarcophagus was. And these are constellations in the sky. And this is King Tut's tomb, which was discovered in 1922. It was the only tomb ever that was found intact. And maybe some of you remember, like in 1971, they had a big Tut exhibition, and then there was one recently in LA, and they brought one of these little figures here. Selket, this one with the scorpion on top of her head, was the sensation of the show. And yet there's something like 20,000 pieces that they've discovered in the tomb. One more elegant than the other, you know? This is an earring, headdress. This is a little chair. This is King Tut and his wife. And you see the snake energy, you know, to the spiritual eye, the kundalini. It's all there. The five-pointed star. And then this, of course, is one of the third nested coffins of King Tut. This is the outer one here. The Nemes headdress is all gold. Then this is blue and gold here. And then within this was this. And this was just a golden headdress. It's solid gold. And it's big, and then it went over his head in the sarcophagus with all of those. And you're not supposed to take pictures here, so I had to sneak all of this on the run and pretend to delete photos when they caught you. But here's Egypt. All those are all dates. We got into a big fight here in the middle of the square because the horse of our carriage started eating the alfalfa and the other. But the people wave at you. They're happy. They're blowing kisses. It's like they're happy people. So, we were on our way through a little village here and into the souk and spices. They grind them there for you. It's the old world. And then the ladies, of course, wanted to buy textiles and tablecloths. This little shop was very small. And then, of course, they're making their pita bread. Food is the same throughout the Middle East in every country. But it was fun food. We had great food and great fun. And then at night, carriage rides in Luxor. Something for everybody. And of course, all these knickknacks, scarabs, amulets of all kinds. And the native Nubian. And this is Luxor. This is our hotel. It's very elegant and very good food. Look at this. The men, the women, and handicapped. They even have an ancient hieroglyph for the handicapped, isn't that? And this is on board ship. So you just sit up there on the deck and drink your cappuccino and watch thousands of years go by. It's completely unchanged. See, this is a quarry. See, they've carved all that away in ancient times, bringing stone for whatever building. And this is Aswan. This is where the first cataract is. You can't sail further. This is the Aga Khan's tomb. This is an island. You can bring home a pet alligator if you're so. So all kinds of boats, and this is the famous old Cataract Hotel, and right across from that is an island with ancient temples in front of it, and even this thing is several hundred tons, It's like this little temple is just lying there. So you go visit this other temple called Philae. They have a sound and light show. It's on an island now because it's been flooded around it. These are tickets to the various temples, riding on yet another boat. This is going to a Nubian village. Karina was trying to get the guy to give her a camel ride, I guess. Very colorful. This is like Black Africa, this is getting into southern Egypt. Very different culture. And here they took us into a school. They're teaching us some words in Arabic and how to count in Arabic. Karina's shouting the letters, and every home has a live alligator inside of it in a little enclosure. I don't know why. Yeah, they're right there. They think of it as some sort of protection. But you do get really tired. Look at these faces, man. After about 10 days, you've seen so much and it's so long, But we had a Galabia party on board, so dancing and fun. And then we got up twice at like 4 o'clock in the morning to go on a hot air balloon. One morning the wind wasn't blowing right, but if you're going to go on a hot air balloon, this is a great place to do it. And I won't show you the movies because they just go up a little bit, but this is a view of Hatshepsut's temple. They launched from the West Bank, and it's quite a view. And you sail over different temples. This is the Seti I temple, and this is a West Bank village, and there's mosque in the mall, and you hear the calls to prayer early in the morning, and everywhere is green along the Nile. So you get a little glimpse of village life. You sail over the Nile, and this is modern Luxor. This is looking down on the Luxor temple and the cruise boats over there on the right. And this is a big mosque, and there's a big Christian church there in town. Everybody's happy to see you, and you land in a sugarcane field. So you'll get to meet this guy, you know, they're all around. They've been doing this for generations. And Egyptians are fun people. You can talk to anybody about anything. They'll help you in any way. And we had nothing but fun. And yet they're thoroughly hip, modern. They know everything that's going on in the world. And yet they have these incredible roots. This is a picture I took from the top of the Great Pyramid when you could climb up there to be there at sunrise. And this is the sound and light show at the Mena House every night. It's pretty spectacular. You can just sit there with your mouth open, you know. This is at Luxor, Abu Simbel, Karnak. It's unique, isn't it? So that's it. So I hope you all go. And actually, people have asked me, do you take tours to Egypt? And I said, you know, we have never done that. But we're actually taking a tour, Karina and I, to Japan in the fall, to the Kyoto area. So maybe we might start that. So that might be a fun thing we could do together sometime, you know, is to go with kind of mature people with a smaller group and really have a nice itinerary that captures the inner spirit of everything plus the exterior highlights. So, a couple of quick questions? Yeah. Yeah.
I'm wondering, all the color in there, how did, I mean, they didn't paint it all. How did they get the color in?
The colors come from ground up original stones. So there's two blues. Turquoise would be the light, and lapis lazuli would be the darker blue. Malachite would be the green. And so these stones, they don't decay, you know, because it's, you know, and so their jewelry was the same. And some are igneous stones formed in fire, like in volcanoes, so they would represent certain gods that had fire energy. It's all like mapped. Unbelievable. Yeah, but it's original stone. That's why it doesn't decay. John?
How is the air quality in general, and also how often have you been?
I've been to Egypt 5 times, and the air quality has degenerated through the years. Yeah, it's not as bad as India, but yeah, it's they burn a lot of refuse, and they don't have emissions controls. There's a lot of diesels and putt things that are spewing out things. So yeah, needs some work. Yeah.
Hi. So what was the name of your favorite temple?
It's the temple of Seti I in a town called Abydos, Abydos.
Okay. And then people say Egypt's unsafe.
Yeah.
What's your perspective?
Yes, Egypt is unsafe, but walking on the streets of Irvine is also unsafe, you know. So I would say, well, to give you a factual story, when you're in the Abydos area, in that central part of Egypt, when you're on a bus, they have an armored car with a 50 caliber machine gun in front of the bus and behind the bus, because Egypt doesn't have any oil. So 70% of its GNP comes from tourism, and people come from all over the world all the time. So when some terrorist shoots up a bus, which happens every few years, tourism, at least especially Americans, you know, just comes to a halt almost instantly because it becomes news and, you know. But the odds of you having a problem there, I would say, are remote, really. And so a lot of this is just for show, I think. I never felt unsafe or had a problem, and I was there during the Gulf War, you know, but I never thought anything could happen to me, so nothing's ever going to happen to me, you know. But it's, you know, you want to be careful. I mean, there are pickpockets in urban areas wherever there are tourists, right? I've been hit in Rome by the gypsies, and, you know, stuff can happen, so you want to be careful. But I would say this, I would never discourage anybody from going for safety reasons. On your first trip, go on a tour, you know, you're staying in nice hotels and everything. But if you want to save money, you can stay in, you know, 4-star hotels instead of 5-star hotels and cut the price in half and meet a ton of cool people along the way.
Okay, you said that the Egyptian people live in poverty, correct?
Well, I don't know what the definition of poverty would be, but I have not seen it progress. The tourist amenities have progressed through the 40 years I've been going, but the lifestyle of the people is not. It's about the same, you know?
Well, that's nice that it hasn't changed and modernized, but how can that be that the people are poor, yet tourism is so great there?
Well, it's about the turnover in governments, and it's like many third world nations, they have an autocratic government, and so the money doesn't trickle down to the people, so it's a real upstairs, downstairs culture.
That's the problem, yep.
Okay?
Can you climb up to the top of the pyramid on the outside?
No, it's forbidden.
Did you get a sense of energy around the area?
Oh, I think you get the energy the minute you get off the airplane, you know. You don't know what's in your head and what's outside you. But yeah, I think if you are sensitive and you sit down and meditate and you try to soak it up, you will feel a very distinctive energy that's different than the temples in Europe and so forth, which are old too, you know.
Right.
Yeah, last one. Go ahead.
Okay, I have a pretty loud voice. If you were gonna get a book on Egypt, do you have something that you would suggest?
Yeah, good question. There was a speaker at this CPAC conference, which is going to be here in Newport Beach in early October, and he's spoken there many times, but he's since passed away, and his name is John Anthony West. And he wrote a guidebook, which is kind of spiritually or energetically, and I think that's the only guidebook worth reading. There are probably some historical novels, fictions. I haven't read any of those in a long time. But it's a fascinating and unique journey, but it was part of the saga moving west, you know. Supposedly they got a lot of their information from ancient India, which is even older, or from Atlantis, or, you know, cultures that we don't even know. But it was really the basis of Greek and Roman culture, of which we're the products of. So this is the genesis of at least Western culture.
Can you talk about your view on spirituality from the Egyptian point of view?
The only thing I could say about spirituality there is what I said at the beginning about this higher age where people think of themselves as gods, as co-creators. They're that empowered. So the relationship with the god or the gods, you know, is much more integrated. It's more of a joint venture, I think. That's as close as I can guess, you know. But how it's depicted, all I know is it's very refined and elegant, and you see the gods have the arms around the pharaohs and everything. It's very intimate, you know. It's not distant as it is in lower age Christianity, you know, which is, I don't think what Christ was talking about, but our interpretation in the lower ages. So go to Egypt, have fun.
Good, beautiful, wonderful.